Henry FitzGerald Heard, commonly called Gerald Heard, was a historian, science writer, educator, and philosopher. He wrote many articles and over 35 books. Heard was a guide and mentor to numerous well-known Americans, including Clare, Boothe, Luce, and Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the 1950s and 1960s. His work was a forerunner of and influence on the consciousness development movement that has spread in the Western world since the 1960s. Early life. The son of an Anglo-Irish clergyman, Heard was born in London. As a young man, he worked for the agricultural cooperative movement in Ireland. In the 1920s and early 1930s, he acted as the personal secretary of Sir Horace Plunkett, founder of the cooperative movement, who spent his last years at Weybridge, England. Naomi Mitchison, who admired Plunkett and was a friend of Heard, wrote of that time, HP, as we all called him, was getting past his prime and often ill but struggling to go on with the work to which he was devoted. Gerald, who was shepherding him about fairly continually, apologized once for leaving a dinner party abruptly when HP was suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. Heard studied history and theology at the University of Cambridge, graduating with honours in history. After working in other roles, he lectured from 1926 to 1929 for Oxford University's Extramural Studies programme. Heard took a strong interest in developments in the sciences. In 1929, he edited The Realist, a short-lived monthly journal of scientific humanism. In 1927, Heard began lecturing for South Place Ethical Society. During this period, he was science commentator for the BBC for 5 years. From 1932 to 1942, he was a council member of the Society for Psychical Research. Career. He first embarked as a book author in 1924, but The Ascent of Humanity, published in 1929, marked his first foray into public acclaim as it received the British Academy's Hertz Prize. From 1930 to 1934, he served as a science and current affairs commentator for the BBC. In 1931, he initiated an informal research group to look into developing group-mindedness or group communications, which became known as the Engineers Study Group, because several of its members were engineers who afterwards were involved in the early development of computers. Naomi Mitchison, who was a friend of Heard, also participated actively in this group. After 1936, Heard broke with Mitchison over her outspoken support for the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War and her attempt, together with other members of the group, to run arms to Republican Spain. In his last letter to Mitchison, Heard expressed his sympathy for the victims of the war in Spain, but compared the taking of sides in a war to the relatives of a patient suffering from a deadly disease believing that he is curable by a hedge. Dr. I'm convinced that the way civilization is going is fatal, and the usual remedies only inflame the disease. At the time, Heard played a minor part in the development of the Peace Pledge Union. Heard became well known as an advocate for pacifism, arguing for the transformation of behavior through meditation and disciplined non-violence. In 1937, he emigrated to the United States, accompanied by Aldous Huxley, Huxley's wife Maria, and the son Matthew Huxley, to give some lectures at Duke University. In the U.S., Heard's main activities were writing, lecturing, and the occasional radio and TV appearance. He had formed an identity as an informed individual who recognized no conflict among history, science, literature, and theology. Heard turned down the offer of a post at Duke, settling in California. Heard wished to address the problem of letting in a free flow of comprehension beyond the everyday threshold of experience while keeping the mind clear. Quote, In 1942, he founded Trabuco College as a facility where comparative religion studies and practices could be pursued. However, the Trabuco College project was somewhat short-lived, and in 1949 the campus was donated by Heard to the Vedanta Society of Southern California, who still maintain the facility as a Ramakrishna monastery and retreat. Heard was the first among a group of literati friends to discover Swami Prabhavananda and Vedanta. Heard became an initiate of Vedanta. Like the outlook of his friend Aldous Huxley, the essence of Heard's mature outlook was that a human being can effectively pursue intentional evolution of consciousness. He maintained a regular discipline of meditation along the lines of yoga for many years. LSD. In the 1950s, Heard tried LSD and felt that, used properly, it had strong potential to enlarge man's mind by allowing a person to see beyond his ego. In late August 1956, Alcoholics Anonymous founder Bill Wilson first took LSD under Heard's guidance and with the officiating presence of Sidney Cohen, a psychiatrist then with the California Veterans Administration Hospital. According to Wilson, the session allowed him to re-experience a spontaneous spiritual experience he had had years before, which had enabled him to overcome his own alcoholism. Heard is also responsible for introducing the then unknown Houston Smith to Huxley. Smith became one of the preeminent religious studies scholars in the United States. His book, The World's Religions, is a classic in the field, has sold over 2 million copies, and is considered a particularly useful introduction to comparative religion. The meeting with Huxley led eventually to Smith's connection to Timothy Leary. 5 Ages of Man. In 1963, what's them considered to be Heard's magnum opus, a book titled The 5 Ages of Man, was published. According to Heard, the prevalent developmental stage among humans in today's well-industrialized societies should be regarded as the 4th, the humanic stage of the total individual who is mentally dominated, feeling him or herself to be autonomous, separate from other persons. Heard writes this stage is characterized by the basic humanic concept of a mankind that is completely self-seeking because it is completely individualized into separate physiques that can have direct knowledge of only their own private pain and pleasure, inferring but faintly the feelings of others. Such a race of ingenious animals, each able to see and to seek his own advantage, must be kept in combination with each other by appealing to the separate interests. In modern industrial societies, a person, especially if educated, has the opportunity to begin entering the first maturity of the humanic total individual in his or her mid-teens. However, according to Heard, based on his decades of studies, his intuition, and his many years of reflection, a 5th stage is in the process of emerging, a post-individual psychological phase of persons and therefore of culture. According to Heard, the 2nd maturity can be one that lies beyond personal success, economic mastery, and the psychophysical capacity to enjoy life. Heard termed this phase leptoid man, because humans increasingly face the opportunity to take a leap into a considerably expanded consciousness, in which the various aspects of the psyche will be integrated, without any aspects being repressed as seeming foreign. A society that recognizes this stage of development will honor and support individuals in their 2nd maturity who wish to resolve their inner conflicts and dissolve their inner blockages and become the sages of the modern world. Further, instead of simply enjoying biological and psychological health, as Freud and other important psychiatric or psychological philosophers of the total individual phase conceived, leptoid man will not only have entered a meaningful 2nd maturity, recognized by his or her society, but can then become a human of developed spirituality, similar to the mystics of the past, and a person of wisdom. but collectively and culturally we are still in the transitional phase, not really recognizing an identity beyond the super-individualistic fourth, humanic, phase. Heard's views were cautionary about developments in society that were not balanced, about inappropriate aims of our use of technological power. He wrote, "We are aware of our precarious imbalance, of our persistent and ever-increasing production of power and our inadequacy of purpose, of our critical analytic ability and our creative paucity, of our triumphantly efficient technical education and our ineffective, irrelevant education for values, for meaning, for the training of the will, the lifting of the heart, and the illumination of the mind." Fiction. Heard wrote fiction under the name H. F. Heard. This included 3 detective novels about Mr. Mycroft. Mr. Mycroft and his friend, Mr. Silchester, appeared in 3 novels: A Taste for Honey, Reply Paid, and The Notched Hairpin, The Great Fog and Other Weird Tales, and The Lost Gavin and Other Tales of the Fantastic, are collections of stories that include both science fiction and ghost stories. Hugh Lamb has described The Great Fog and The Lost Gavin as 2 splendid books of short stories. The Black Fox is an occult thriller featuring black magic. Doppelgangers is a dystopian novel influenced by Huxley's Brave New World, set after the psychological revolution. Anthony Boucher described Doppelgangers as, in style and imagination, the most exciting and provocative piece of science fiction since the heyday of M.P. Shield. Death. Heard died on 14 August 1971 at his home in Santa Monica, California, of the effects of several earlier strokes he had, beginning in 1966. Bibliography. Narcissus, An Anatomy of Clothes. The Ascent of Humanity. The Emergence of Man. Social Substance of Religion, an essay of the evolution of religion. This Surprising World, a journalist looks at science. These Hurrying Years, an historical outline 1900 to 1933. Science in the Making, The Source of Civilization, first published by Cape 1935. Exploring the Stratosphere, The Third Morality, Science Front 1936. Pain, Sex and Time, A New Outlook on Evolution and the Future of Man. The Creed of Christ, an interpretation of the Lord's Prayer. Training for the Life of the Spirit. The Code of Christ, an interpretation of the Beatitudes. A Taste for Honey. Man the Master, a Dialogue in the Desert. Murder by Reflection, Reply Paid, a Mystery. The Recollection, a Preface to Prayer. The Great Fog and Other Weird Tales. The Gospel According to Gamaliel. The Eternal Gospel. Doppelgangers. The President of the United States, Detective. Is God Evident? An Essay Toward a Natural Theology. Prayers and Meditations, a monthly cycle arranged for daily use. 1949 ed. Gerald Heard. The Lost Gavin and Other Tales of the Fantastic. The Notched Hairpin, a Mycroft mystery. Prayers and Meditations, a monthly cycle arranged for daily use. The Black Fox, a novel of the 70s. Is God in History? Morals Since 1900. Is Another World Watching? The Riddle of the Flying Saucers. Gabriel and the Creatures. The Human Venture. Training for a Life of Growth. The 5 Ages of Man, The Psychology of Human History.